Welcome to Spirits in the Theater. Today we're going to talk about Mad Max Fury Road. Not the one with Mel Gibson, the one with Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron. I went and saw this movie in theaters a few years ago whenever it came out, and I had an interesting experience with this movie. And I think it's different than most people's, or at least most of the opinions I heard. Most people that I've heard talk about this movie loved it. Usually it's dudes, like friends of mine, right? They love this movie. And in their defense, it was very well done. It was fascinating the way they shot things and that, especially that driving fight scene. Super cool, for sure. But I was like impressively disturbed by this movie. And I know this is not a popular opinion, but I wanted to share a bit of this take on it. I think it's helpful to just kind of see some of this. The movie's an action film, right? And obviously this post-apocalyptic, like dystopian world, whatever. Interesting. I think it's fun to watch those dynamics get played out and, you know, how the story's told. But in this movie, there was too much overt perversion of the human image throughout this movie for me to be able to celebrate it. There's so many specific details in there that were nuanced and persistent throughout the movie that I was like, this is not by accident. This is gross. And I don't know how much of that was from the original film. I haven't actually seen the first one or the original, but for example, when they're driving in the desert and fighting from the cars, one of the bigger vehicles has a dude chained up with an electric guitar and fire coming out of it or something, and he's just screaming with his tongue out and playing metal, and he's just chained to this thing physically. And this whole display is he's literally this giant dashboard ornament in a car. He's just there for decoration, which to me felt like such a strong middle finger to God, kind of. I'm not trying to make this religious, but taking the human frame and making it debased like that, just lacking such dignity and value, was just so perverse. But it didn't stop there. I mean, you have the women back at the home or the human base or whatever that just have tubes attached to them, and they're just cranking out breast milk to feed the other babies or whatever. They're just being treated like cows. They're just resources, right? And then the young men who have birth defects or genetic problems or whatever are just being sent into war, and there's manual labor, and they just spray their teeth and they commit suicide and all this. That was just such a depraved, and they all called him daddy, or there was such a family thing that was so perverse, brothers and sisters and moms or dads or whatever, and this affection and intimacy in these overtly abusive slave driving relationships. It was gross. And then even people using other people as blood transfusions as a resource. Tom Hardy's character got taken on one of the drives because the guy who was using him was hooking up to him for blood and just trying to sustain his own life. It was vampiric and gross. And so and then even the brides that were reserved only for the king or whatever he was called, and just how they were treated and the abuse, it was just there's so much degradation of human life in this movie throughout the movie. It was overt and gross, and I couldn't celebrate it. I'm this is overtly we I think I told my friend, we went and saw it together, and I was that was one of the most demonic things I've seen. He was what? I was it might be one of the more demonic movies I've ever seen in my life. And he's what are you talking about? I just couldn't believe that. I'm man, it was persistent and pronounced and developed throughout, and it was gross. And so that was really hard for me to get by. And you guys, I think one thing I want to make a statement on here is I think we want to remain sensitive to that kind of stuff. We don't want to become desensitized to the human being's image being perverted, being destroyed, being corrupted. There's a history in our world of our likeness and image being perverted and distorted and mixed and changed, and it's been a big ploy of the enemy to try and sabotage what the Lord instituted in humanity, right? So when I see that being displayed in movies, sometimes it's creative and interesting, and they can make great villains or some interesting heroes or whatever. But when it starts to play into the siphoning off of life from a human being and degrading what they were and diminishing their value and erasing their significance from the equation and turning them into a resource or a tool or a decoration, twisted. Like when you, even like, we can get toward, this is a little maybe extreme, but like when you have someone laying on a sushi bed and they're naked and, you know, they're at a party and there's a human being laying there as like a service, they're decorative, they're a performer. I'm like, I don't love the idea of using the human likeness as something, like as a tool. There's something twisted about it. Like, I don't know what it is, but there's something there. So anyway, Mad Max Fury Road, extremely guilty of that in many ways. The movie was fascinating. It was a fun adventure. It was so stressful. I remember being very stressed out throughout the movie because all of the conditions that all the characters were in there was always something wrong. Something was missing. Something was difficult. It was gritty. It was barbaric. And just like there's ruthlessness to it throughout. And it was hard to celebrate. It's like, where are the heroes? Mad Max was barely a hero. I'm like, he's just like fighting for his life, trying to survive. Obviously, he did some heroic stuff, and you know, especially given the state that he was in. But the whole world was just like, it was in garbage state, you know. And so trying to watch that for 2 hours was like, this is like a lot to take in. It was interesting to watch the brides that worked together and see Charlize Theron's character, Furiosa, or whatever her name was, right? Like, playing her role. It was interesting to watch those like unspoken interactions and like kind of learn about the story as you went. And the stunts they did and the shot that they had those fights in, that was a super cool scene for sure. As far as like camera work and film production is concerned, that was cool for sure. And so I think from an entertainment standpoint, just as far as action, super enjoyable, super cool. But the elements throughout, especially regarding the story, I'm like, I can't just swallow this whole. Like a lot of this I have to say no to. I have to oppose this, you know? It was an interesting experience. It was definitely memorable, but I think we want to be mindful of those ideas that kind of just get subtly passed across the screen and just like slipped in there, like, accept this. Is this okay? Can you accept that? Does that make you intrigued? Right? And it's the source and nature of it is twisted, perverse, and evil. Like, we need to recognize those things and say no to that, just at least in our own hearts. I'm not saying we can't look at it. Sometimes it's actually helpful not even to look. But at least not allowing it past the gate and letting it become something that we can celebrate or tolerate or accept. You know what I mean? It's important to like identify those lines of demarcation and refuse to let something come past it. And this would definitely be a line for me. Like, when we start tearing apart the human being, like, we've got a problem. So I guess I would say when it comes to Mad Max, like, hey, it's a fun, entertaining movie, but also it comes with a price. There is some heavy nastiness to have to wade throughout the film. It doesn't relent. It's like to the end of the movie, it is constant depravity. So something to be mindful of. Do I recommend this movie? Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say it's a fun movie. It's probably worth watching as long as you're prepared and willing to do the work of like guarding your heart, if you will, from the nastiness that you'd have to endure. And for some people, it's like, well, why is it even worth it? It's like, it's probably not. It depends on, you know, where you're at with that process. But man, that was a rough movie. And I wanted to incorporate this kind of a talk in the midst of this conversation because not all the movies are awesome out there. You know what I mean? Like, not all of them are just like sparkly and fun. Some of them have some serious elements to have to wrestle with and negotiate and figure out what do we do with that, you know? And Mad Max is one of those movies. And remember, guys, when you're watching a movie, you're never alone. Like this video, comment below, thoughts on Mad Max. Am I coming across too extreme? What do you think? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to check out other videos we've got coming out, and you can hit that bell button for notifications, and we'll see you next time.